you very much, Pastel, and thank you all for taking time from, I know, what are very busy schedules to join us today. We hope that this is going to be informative and helpful and will inform the work that you'll be doing, as all of us are doing, to address these challenges which are facing the Black community and historically Black colleges and universities. So it's timely for us to convene a corporate and philanthropy leaders to discuss the Black higher education crisis and the urgent need to elevate and embrace historically Black colleges and universities so they can better serve Black and Brown college students and put them on the pathway for successful lives and fulfilling careers. I will share 5 core message points for consideration, and we will allow time for discussion and questions. I am joined today by my colleague, Dr. Brian Bridges, who is UNCF's Vice President for Research and Member Engagement, and an expert in HBCU research and oversees the work we do to strengthen our network of HBCUs and other HBCUs as well. While African Americans continue to lag behind other groups in educational attainment, we cannot discount the significant gains achieved over the past several decades. Historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, have been a primary factor in promoting African American educational success and continue to account for a significant share of all African Americans post-secondary, that is college, graduate school, and professional school attainment. UNCF's founding in 1944 was pivotal in ensuring the legacies of historically Black colleges and universities. And for 76 years later, our network of 37 private historically Black colleges and universities partner with UNCF to access funding, capacity building, training, and other resources to ensure that our institutions remain pillars of educational proficiency and impact. Since March, UNCF has been working to continue to support our HBCUs and our students to meet emerging and crisis emergency needs. Today, we are focused on moving from crisis to recovery and ensuring that our students and our institutions are ready for the fall semester. Next slide, please. The minority community has been disproportionately impacted by COVID. Black Americans are dying from COVID at significantly disproportionate rates. According to data from the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University, in partnership with The Atlantic, where the race is known, Blacks comprise 24% of deaths, dying at a rate nearly 2 times higher than their population share. I believe here in Georgia, where I live, we account for 33% of the population, 70% of those who have been hospitalized, and 50% of all deaths. According to data collected by Strata Education Network, across all racial groups, Black Americans were most likely to have lost their jobs or had their working hours reduced. May 2020 unemployment rate, we know, was 12.4 for white Americans, but 16.8% for Black Americans. Particularly for Black people, these job losses are permanent. In a new report from McKinsey & Company, the racial wealth gap between Black and white families increased by 54% between 1992 and 2016. COVID is expected to accelerate the economic, educational, and social disparities that exist in Black communities. And I will be saying more about the work that we have been doing specifically with McKinsey shortly. Take the next slide, please. So the education of a generation of Black and Brown students is at risk. That's a strong statement, but I think the facts support that risk. Our students are at risk of falling behind or dropping out of school at rates higher than their non-Black peers. Many students' educations were disrupted by campus closures. While schools moved to online learning platforms, some students were unable to access online learning due to unreliable access to technology and to internet. Our students come from homes where family members are at higher risk of infection or death from COVID. Students are forced to take on more employment and family responsibilities instead of, or in addition to, focusing on their studies. This is a pervasive response that we've heard from our students, that once they left the campuses where they were able to do their work, that the challenges of home environments and community environments that lacked internet access made pursuing their spring studies and completing them effectively more challenging than for their peers. Racism, anti-Black violence, and police brutality, the recent deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery have put a spotlight on the policies that keep Black people disenfranchised. We are seeing despair and anger in our streets. And these are the very communities that our predominantly first generation and low income students who attend HBCUs come from. They're coming from the communities that are at the heart of disparity and underinvestment all across this country. Now, HBCUs have served and continue to serve disproportionately the most vulnerable Black communities. Most HBCUs are the first in their families to go to college, as you can see up here, and that's about between 40 and 50% of them. They are from households with annual incomes below $35,000. Over 70% of our HBCU students come from this income level. They qualify for some form of federal or state-based financial aid. And they are more subject and more likely to hold part-time jobs to supplement college costs. And many of these jobs were lost due to COVID. We've already heard as well about how many of the students who were lucky enough to have internships have lost those opportunities over the course of the summer as well. The top 10 institutions where African-American science and engineering PhDs earned their bachelor's degrees are HBCUs. And as Dr. Bridges will note, HBCUs produce around 25% of all of the Black STEM graduates. In a 2015 Gallup study, African-American HBCU graduates reported having experienced more support and higher levels of engagement than their peers at non-HBCUs. And I note that because campus culture and campus safety, I believe, will be enhanced expectations for Black students now and in the future, given the social and cultural environment that we're seeing emerge in these very difficult times. COVID-19 forced higher education institutions to close campuses and quickly move course offerings online to prevent a disruption in learning. Now, we saw that so many of American higher education institutions were unready for that transition from person-to-person pedagogy to online. But for many HBCUs, this new way of delivering education revealed significant challenges, including a lack of infrastructure to support remote operations, access to digital learning platforms, and faculty abilities to teach remotely. And as we've probed this issue of online learning, we've also found that a larger percentage of our HBCU students feel uncertain about their ability to learn and learn effectively using online. And I think that's largely due to the fact that they've had little opportunity to be taught how to use these very different pedagogies. And that's one of the challenges which we hope to address. HBCUs are facing potential enrollment decreases of 20 to 30% this fall. I want to underscore that. We know that there's a likelihood that these additional disruptions that have occurred in the spring and may continue to occur in the fall will reduce potentially enrollments at all American colleges and universities, and many students are considering taking a gap year, for example. But our best research is suggesting that the impact will be even greater for historically Black colleges and universities. According to McKinsey & Company, across all HBCUs, we could see a budget gap of over $760 million if they must provide online instruction through the spring of 2021. So a reduction, significant double-digit reduction in total enrollment, and then increased costs if, or loss of revenue, a significant loss of revenue if they're not able to have these students and they must provide the education remotely. Most HBCUs rely on tuition for operating needs, and many have little or no endowment. UNCF HBCUs, and ours are private institutions. Median endowment is approximately $12 million, compared with $34 million nationally for similar institutions. As an example, Howard University ranks number 160 on a list of higher education institutions' endowments. And Howard has the largest endowment of all 100 historically Black colleges and universities. Spelman's has the largest per capita, but you can see that they rank well below their predominantly white institutions and peers. Our institutions have no supplementary revenue source on which to rely if tuition decreases are severe. No reserves, no supplementary revenue sources. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, if this were not bad enough, I think, and we don't want to just do a litany of a negative litany, but I just think it's important for all of us to understand just how severe the impact of this disease has been on the African American community and the losses that our students and their families are contending with. And the full effect of this is yet to be realized. Black kids at every grade level, from pre-K through high school and on into college, are not being educated now and are falling farther behind their white peers. While schools quickly pivoted to online learning, some of them, the most affluent, Black and brown children were unable to participate due to limited access to technology and internet services. Our students face a looming mental health crisis as well. In March 2020 survey of UNCF scholarship recipients undertaken by Dr. Bridges and the Frederick D. Patterson Research Institute, which had more than 1,000 respondents, nearly 50% reported the need for increased mental health and wellness support. We do not yet understand the emotional toll on our students of COVID and now the anti-Black police violence, which has raised another horror in the African American community. Our HBCUs are not fully equipped to provide adequate support, either directly through face-to-face interaction with mental health professionals or virtually. And this is one of the areas that we are looking at as a service that we think they're going to need in the fall. The litany of challenges facing HBCU students include the following: parental loss of jobs, furlough, or loss of one or more family members to the COVID pandemic, access to health care, which has been disrupted. We know that African American home ownership is low, and so they're reliant on rentals, and we anticipate there could well be an epidemic of evictions that will also impact our students and their families. We all see nationally that food insecurity is on the rise. And for our students who are, I've already said, are 70% low income, food insecurity, evictions, loss of employment, loss of health services, these are all realities that are coming at them, not one at a time, but all together. And all of these impact students' pathway to college, their ability to complete their education, and HBCU fall enrollment. Because our college students face an uncertain future, we must intervene now to ensure that they return to school and finish their educations. We run the risk of losing the education of a generation of Black and brown students. At worst, we lose that generation. At best, there is a likelihood of a loss of momentum toward closing the African American college attainment gap. While we anticipate that campuses will eventually reopen, we must prepare for online learning to continue through the fall and must be ready for ongoing challenges. Can we go to the next slide? We must focus on the looming crisis in Black education, and we have to see HBCUs as a critical partner in these solutions. We need different strategies to close the gap for Black and brown children, their families, and their communities. In post-secondary education, college attainment is a necessary component of achieving this gap. HBCUs, as I've already noted, provide safe spaces for Black and brown students. Strengthening the HBCU network strengthens our nation by preparing a pipeline of underrepresented students for college attainment, for meaningful careers, for engaged citizenship, and for leadership. UNCF has been a leader in efforts to increase federal funding for HBCUs and minority-serving institutions. Over the last 12 months, UNCF took the lead in ensuring the restoration of over $250 million annually for STEM education at historically Black colleges, Hispanic-serving institutions, and other minority-serving institutions. We were the lead in driving the passage of the Futures Act, which was signed by the president at the end of December. But we have also been at the lead in strengthening the support that has come to minority-serving institutions and historically Black colleges in the CARES Act, which, in addition to the general support that it gave to American higher education institutions, because of our initiative, an additional $1 billion went to the institutions that serve the students most in need, historically Black colleges, tribal colleges, Hispanic-serving institutions, and other minority-serving institutions. And today we are ramping up our efforts to ensure that in the next stimulus, there will be additional funds for these same subset of American higher education, those that serve Black and brown students, low-income students, and first-generation students. In addition to federal funding, securing private philanthropic dollars and corporate dollars is essential to making a real impact. And we cannot rely solely on federal support. Private support will ensure that our institutions can operate in the fall, deliver online curriculum as necessary, and reach our underserved and vulnerable populations. 3 of every 4, 75% of UNCF HBCU undergraduate students come from families whose income qualifies for the Pell Grant, compared to 33% of our non-HBCU peers. The Pell Grant is critical to close the college attainment gap for minority and low-income students. And once again, UNCF is in the lead, now leading a national advocacy effort to double the Pell Grant distribution from its current $6,300 maximum to $12,600 maximum per student each academic year. Several of our participants are partners in UNCF's effort to build a robust and nationally recognized pipeline of underrepresented students equipped for jobs of the re-emerging American economy. Our success record over 76 years, securing some $5 billion in gifts to support students and historically Black colleges, and helping more than 500,000 students graduate from college, is due to the vision shared by philanthropy and corporations that all Americans should have equal access to a college education. There is still so much work to be done. As I conclude, I want to share with you some of the work that we have been doing with our partner McKinsey & Company. We engaged McKinsey & Company in March to work with us and our schools to set up a crisis response operating model and address near-term operational challenges, including students' financial insecurity and remote learning. McKinsey is assessing our entire network of 37 historically Black colleges and universities. In short order, we will quantify the technology, the products, the goods and services, and the financial resources required to support our institutions and our students as they reopen this fall. Preliminary discussions with our HBCU presidents have highlighted the need for database of successful practices from within and outside the UNCF HBCU network that our institutions can readily access and apply to their work. Capacity building to help our institutions create a world-class student experience. Infrastructure to help our institutions transition seamlessly to online learning. And reserve funds and endowments to protect them in the future and to enhance the work that they do. Given the unprecedented level of interest in supporting our Black and brown students and HBCUs, we have already begun to receive sizable commitments. Our goal is to build a strategic investment fund to support our students and to help our institutions move from crisis to stabilization to resiliency and proficiency. Over the last 30 days alone, we have secured some $33 million in gifts and commitments from individuals, foundations, and corporations toward this fund. UNCF will inform our donors and partners of the qualitative and quantitative outcomes of this work to enhance, to strengthen, and to elevate our historically Black colleges and universities and their student experience. We are prepared to work with each of you individually and any other organizations you think would be interested in helping on this urgent initiative. That concludes my formal presentation. At this time, I'm delighted to entertain questions and to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Bridges, in ensuring that we're able to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Lomax. We are now open for Q&A. At this time, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. The first question we have is, would love to know about trends you are seeing in historically Black community colleges.
Brian, you want to start with that one? Trends that we're seeing.
Sure.
Why don't we talk about trends? Of, part of it would be what the trends are on the reopening and some of the challenges that we're seeing across all of the institutions and opportunities.
Yes, and thank you, Michael, for the opportunity to join you here, and to our our most trusted partners and supporters. We're seeing some trends where our institutions we've been working very closely with over the past few months around building a response as a cohort, but also as a network of institutions to develop reopening plans. Just within the last couple of weeks, we've sent out surveys to our member institutions to have their students surveyed to find out more about their plans around whether or not they would prefer in-person and re-enrollment, or whether or not they prefer to actually do instruction totally virtually. And so our institutions are working diligently, and that's part of our engagement with McKinsey, to help them think through those issues, as well as the financial implications of any of the choices that the institutions might make. What we're thinking will likely happen is that there will be probably a hybrid approach, that there will be some institutions that will definitely take a partially virtual as well as in-person to some degree, to a lesser degree than previously, as far as enrollment is concerned. Specifically about HBCU community colleges, I don't think that they're dramatically different from the entire HBCU network in that regard, but the institutions have been buoyed a bit by the CARES Act stimulus funds, but they're still working very diligently to try to secure more resources to help them in their reopening plans. The challenge is that there's so much uncertainty around how long this pandemic will persist. They've been working diligently. We know that we've been having conversations with them around purchases of PPE materials and how those might be leveraged on their campuses and used in the fall to help students who choose to come back in person to be able to protect themselves from COVID-19. So the institutions are working diligently. We're on calls with them weekly, and some institutions more often than that, to make sure that they're considering all the appropriate measures when they look at reopening for the fall.
The next question is, what is the status of efforts to double Pell Grant?
UNCF has a robust public policy and government affairs operation led by our Senior Vice President, Rodriguez Murray, and he has led the efforts that we have succeeded in so far to build a coalition across all historically Black colleges, Hispanic serving institutions, and other minority serving institutions. And these institutions collectively are in all 50 states and represent a total enrollment of about 5 million students. It was through this coalition that we were able to get strong bipartisan support for the Futures Act, which enabled us to refund a program that had gone out of existence, which was called mandatory Pell, which shared $250 million annually with this set of institutions to ensure STEM education was robust at the institutions. This same coalition of minority serving institutions, led by HBCUs and by UNCF, was able to get $1 billion in the stimulus for this subset of institutions, in addition to the funding that went to all institutions. We are now working as a coalition to seek both bipartisan support for a temporary, at least over the next 4 years, doubling of the Pell Grant as an inducement to students to return to college. We have not yet gotten that into any of the stimulus bills, but that is the focus of our attention. And we are now working with some of our K through 12 partners, particularly in the charter community, who have very strong ties with the Republican side of the aisle, but who are also producing first generation low-income students who want to go to college and for whom the Pell Grant would be a needed enhancement to the way that they will fund their undergraduate education. So we're building a coalition. We are being very intentional about that. And we're pressing forward. And if there are others, if there are those in this, on this call who have particular interest in that, we can provide you with additional information that will help us press forward on this bipartisan issue that we're seeking strong support for.
Could you speak more about the Strategic Investment Fund?
Yes, and so, this
Michael, you muted yourself.
Dr. Lomax, you muted yourself.
not me.
There you go.
I never mute myself. So there are 5 areas that the investment fund will focus on. We haven't announced the fund yet because we're still, completing the work on its chartering and its activation. But supporting member internal capacity building with a set of tools and initiatives focused on creating world-class student experiences. That's 1. Bolstering members' technical infrastructure by obtaining hardware and software to transition to successfully online learning environments. 3, creating a repository of best practices and content experts within and outside of the UNCF HBCU network that members can readily access and apply. Solidifying institutional financial reserves by working with schools to develop expertise to build appropriate cash reserves, and to strengthen as well for UNCF the cash reserves and overall financial resilience of this institution, which is doing so much work to support the others. The funds that will be placed in this fund will be overseen by UNCF and our Institute for Capacity Building, and the funds will be used in ways that can be both tracked and where we have both qualitative and quantitative measures of the return. So we're not. That's sort of the outline of the work. We are already, as I said, receiving investments. We're at about $33 million to date in commitments to this fund. And our expectation is that we'll announce it publicly. You're getting an early indication of the work that we will be doing. And we'll also so it will be both a cash fund, but it's also going to be seeking technology investments that can be made in kind by major technology organizations, both software and hardware, that will enable students. So this is an announcement. These are initiatives that will all be under the banner of the Strategic Investment Fund at UNCF. I hope that answers the question. But we're certainly prepared to have further discussions with anyone who has an interest in that fund. Next question.
How many of our HBCUs have less than 1,000 students?
I'm going to turn that over to Brian.
Yes, and actually I just went to the NCS, the Department of Education's webpage. There are 29 HBCUs that have less than 1,000 students. But I think that's not really the more accurate question to ask is around HBCU enrollments long term, because I think that there is this perception that HBCUs have been dying on the vine for decades. And actually, when you look at HBCU enrollments going back to 1970, each subsequent decade, HBCU enrollments have increased and have steadily increased from 1970 up until 2010. And we've seen a dip in enrollment since then, and that was largely prompted by the Parent Plus loan crisis that hit in 2011, 2012. And actually, HBCU enrollments have just been rebounding slightly ever since then. There was an uptick beyond the dip in the 2017 year and 2018 year. There was basically a flat, there was a decline of a couple of thousand students. But for the most part, when you look longitudinally, HBCUs are stronger than they've been as far as enrollment is concerned up until the last 7 or 8 years. That was prompted by some bad policies that affected students' access to financial aid.
Yeah, you know, the enrollment issue is a complex one. In the beginning, in the early 1970s, African Americans got access to a much broader array of institutions, and so more Black students could go to institutions which excluded them prior to that date. But if you look at the enrollments at HBCUs in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and I'm a graduate of Morehouse College in 1968, the total enrollment at the college was less than 1,000 students. Today, in an environment where African Americans have access to a broader array of institutions, it's 2.5 times that amount. So, you know, the institutions have grown. The role that they play continues to be robust. They outperform. They are, as we could say, 3% of all American higher education. They enroll 17. What is it? They enroll 10%.
Yes.
They enroll 10% of all African Americans pursuing an undergraduate degree, but they produce nearly 20% of all of all of Black college graduates. And in areas like STEM, they produce 25%. So they are disproportionately impactful. And the other point that I would just make about them is, you know, they are what we call cornerstone institutions in the Black community. And if we're going to strengthen the Black community, we have to strengthen the institutions that exist in that community. Other cornerstone institutions are the Black church, Black businesses, which are small but account for a significant percentage of the African American employment. And so I think the question isn't how many attend Black colleges today, but how many can attend if we make further investment in them. What is their elasticity? Can they double in size? Can they attract more students? Can they, through the use of technology, attract an even larger number of students who want an HBCU experience but won't be able to achieve it in person, but will do it electronically? And we're already seeing, I had a long discussion with Mary Schmidt-Campbell, the president of Spelman College, which had not been in the area of online education. And they have now, because of COVID, expanded into online, and they see this as an opportunity to expand their reach and to give more young women a Spelman education than they can fit on the Spelman campus. So I think that there is increased interest in historically Black colleges among students. The issue of campus climate and safety is going to, I think, direct a number of students to these institutions. And what we want them to have is the capability to meet that demand with strong programs that are either in person or online or some combination thereof. And that will take investment.
Next question.
Pastel?
I understand mental health will be needed in many of these schools. Can you talk a little more about student debt in the midst of all these challenges?
About student debt?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, we clearly think that for the students that we attract, who are first in their families by and large to go to college, and are predominantly 75% of these students are coming from low-income families. We think this is our market. Students who are this is the first rung on the ladder to achieving a college education, and for them and for their families, breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty. So it's absolutely essential that these young people get the opportunity to go to college. The largest obstacle for these students is how they pay for it. And so that's why UNCF has focused our attention on public policy, like doubling the Pell Grant. And we have been getting increases in the Pell Grant, but we now want to see significant increases in Pell. We've been doing that work for a long time. We think we're at an inflection moment when we may be able to do that. But we're also working with to look at innovative ways of students underwriting their debt. So, whether that is income share agreements or other ways that will eliminate their strong need for debt. And onerous debt, like comes with the Parent Plus program. So we think that this is a continued obstacle for Black students going to college, is the debt issue. It is exacerbated if they're going to historically Black colleges, which don't have the endowment reserves to pay to give significant scholarships. But this is not just an issue for Black students going to historically Black colleges, but Black colleges, and UNCF in particular, are taking the lead on attempting to find public policy solutions like doubling the Pell Grant, which would have impact for our students, but for all low-income students pursuing a college degree.
As you can imagine, companies are financially challenged in response to both COVID-19 and the racial injustice unrest. Can someone talk us through how companies can best support with their national and local partnerships of UNCF? Give to the local UNCF offices, or will the national level support suffice and benefit all of the 37 members equally?
Well, I believe it's a both and strategy. And I'm going to be quite frank about that. The work that we do in our 24 offices around communities across this country really address the relationship we have with locals. We have people calling on companies all from Los Angeles to New York, from Chicago to New Orleans. And every one of those communities has students who either want to go to college and want to go to a historically Black college, and they don't have one in their community, so we help them get to those schools. They have large alumni bases in those communities, and so we're doing things that are important to the Black community in Los Angeles because there are so many graduates of HBCUs, and so helping kids get back to those schools is important. Or we're helping in those communities ensure that young people who want to go to Dillard or Xavier, for example, in New Orleans, that they're getting the support from the New Orleans community to go there, or they want to go to Morehouse Spelman or Clark Atlanta University or Payne and Augusta, and they're getting support from businesses in Atlanta and Georgia to help them do that. So I would say that large companies that have state offices or local offices, they should also work with our UNC offices there. But on these major strategic investments, which are going to have impact across the entire network of HBCUs, that's when you work with UNCF. And so I think it is a both and strategy. And I would also just say that, the African American community is an under-resourced community, but it's also been an under-invested community. So that, I'm hearing from some major corporations that are saying, well, we see that we should have more Black employees. Who has the best business school? Where can I find the best talent to come work in my company? That's not the question to ask. The question to ask is, how do I make sure that the business programs at all of these Black colleges are strong? How can we partner with them now and reap those benefits for our companies and for our nation by producing outstanding graduates in the future? This can't just be a transaction And I think that, my challenge back to the business community is not to view this as a transaction, but to view this as an investment in the communities in which they are located. But quite frankly, to invest in the Black community, which has not been the beneficiary of strategic and thoughtful investment at the same scale that it's been made in other communities. And that's why we have these huge gaps. HBCUs alone can't close them, but if we're working together strategically, we can move the needle on addressing these intergenerational challenges that the Black community has faced because it has not received the kind of support and investment that it should from philanthropy or corporations. A recent report which has been issued by on American philanthropy, and it's echoing Green and Bridgespan, calls out the fact that American philanthropy, if it is approached by a Black leader of a social enterprise and a white leader of an equivalent social enterprise, the amount of investment that will be made in the enterprise led by the white leader is significantly larger than the amount of investment that will be made in the equivalent Black led social enterprise. Now, there are folks on this line whom I'm looking at right now who have have been always in the lead of making significant and scaled investments in the Black community, but they have been the minority. And what our hope is that as America sees these disparities now, that others will ask the question, how can I step up and do this work in an equitable fashion and not in an inequitable fashion? And that's what we think this strategic investment fund is going to be an opportunity to address and to show the return on the investment, to track that investment. As I've talked to some of our most longest term philanthropic partners, what they want to know is if I make this investment, Michael, can we track it and see the impact and the outcomes that it's producing? And can we, we don't necessarily say that every investment is going to, exactly as you've anticipated it, produce that outcome. But can we track it? Can we course correct? And can we produce outcomes equivalent to the investment that is being made? And that's the approach that we will take with this strategic investment fund.
Okay, we have time for one more question. The remainder of the questions will be followed up with after. The final question is, there is strength in numbers. I understand the folks of UNCF's mission to private Black institutions, but are there any initiatives that bring UNCF together with public institutions, especially given the new normal?
Well, I would say that the leadership of UNCF is totally focused to the network of historically Black colleges and universities that includes private and public. And if you look at the work that we have been doing through our Institute for Capacity Building, if you look at the work that we've done on one of our most significant initiatives funded by the Lilly Endowment, the Career Pathways Initiative, that includes private and public institutions, as well as another category of institution, predominantly Black institutions, which is recognized, another category recognized in the Department of Education, which is institutions, and Brian, you're going to have to help me here, with a Black Pell population of
50%. 50% Pell and 40% African American.
And so, what I would say is that we see both private historically Black colleges, public historically Black colleges, and predominantly Black institutions, which have a total undergraduate population of about 500,000 when you aggregate them, as similarly missioned, but differently categorized. and that their footprint is not just in the region where historically Black colleges are found, which is primarily in the states of the old Confederacy, but spans across the country. Our goal at UNCF is to close the education attainment gap for all Black kids. And we can't do that by just targeting one small group. But over the last 76 years, we have focused, and then over the last 16 years in particular, on what are the interventions that we can make with these similarly missioned institutions that will produce different outcomes. That's what we've been working on in building our capacity building model. That is the way that, and learning how to do this work effectively. We've learned how to do it effectively with private historically Black colleges, and we want to expand the concentric circles to a coalition of the willing. And so that if there's an institution in that is similarly missioned but designated a predominantly Black institution in Chicago or Indianapolis or in New York City, they've got the same kind of kids that we've got attending our institutions. And the learnings that we have and the network that we will be helping to intermediate and manage is the network that will enable us to do this work at scale and have impact well beyond the private historically Black colleges. But we begin our work there. And those are our proof points. And that's where we have developed our knowledge and experience on working with these institutions. And now we are expanding out to a broader group. But we will need equivalent investment to do that. And you're right. I've almost exhausted all the time with these long responses. Brian, did you want to add anything to my answer?
I think that Dr. Lomax hit things right on the head there. These are institutions that, the word we use often, and he referred to it in his opening remarks around resilience, that we're working to build a resilient network of institutions. And as I've said, was quoted in a AP article a month ago or so, that HBCUs are resilient in ways that people don't realize or give them credit for, that they've navigated Reconstruction and the nadir, they've navigated the 1918 pandemic and World War I, they've navigated World War II and the Great Depression, as well as the Civil Rights Movement, and are now stronger than they've been in the past. And so, however, they need continued investment after decades of underinvestment in order to continue to build that resilience. And so I echo everything that Dr. Lomax has said, and I'm just glad to be part of the conversation.
And so I want to again thank all of you for taking the time. We thought this was important to do. I think we underestimated the interest level. There have been nearly 100 people participating in today's conversation. We're going to continue the conversation as we articulate more clearly the work of the investment fund. We'll share that as well. But I would just say to each of you, you know where to find us. If you have an interest in having individualized conversations, our team is prepared to do that. But I just want to say, and I would say one other thing. This has been a very troubling last several weeks. The pandemic was hard enough, and then suddenly to face America's longstanding racial history of anti-Black behavior and attitudes in an inhuman act in a city that we wouldn't have expected to see this happen in. And then to see the response, both the initial response, which was anger and outrage. I don't like to use the term rioting. Dr. King called rioting the voice of the unheard. I think we saw that, but then to see Americans self-regulating their protests, and to see people from every community come together and say, this is something we have to change, gives me hope that we've reached a point where those who have the resources will take a look into the African American community and see not deficit, but see opportunity. And to see that that partnership is the approach that we have to take. You know, I've been in this business of work. I've been at UNCF for 16 years. I was the president of Dillard University for 7. I've spent my entire 50-year higher education career in historically Black colleges. I've dealt with philanthropists for a very long time. So often what they say to us is, we want to help you, but this is what we want you to do. And this is what we think success looks like, and this is the way you're to do it. The relationship we're looking for is not a prescriptive relationship. We're looking for a partnership. We can see the problems that need to be addressed. We want partners who want to work with us on helping us sort of identify the most effective and efficient partnership. And I'm looking at people whom I know because of the approaches you've taken in your philanthropy, whether it's personal or institutional or corporate. You've taken that approach, but we need more to join this coalition of the willing if we're really going to break the cycle of poverty and to close the inequities and inequalities, which are the gulf between Black America and the rest of the nation. We are committed to that work. We stand proudly. We believe we have a strong record of achievement, but there's so much work left to be done, and we cannot do it alone. We need you, and I want to thank you for joining us today in this initial conversation. Bless you all. Thank you so much.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lomax.
Thank you.
And Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Who is that who just said thank you? Was it Tony?
Thank you. Tony?
Tony Signori, yes, Dr. Lomax.
Good to see you, Tony, in a library as always.
In my library, and you know, unfortunately not in view. To my left is my beautiful portrait of Frederick Douglass, of course, that, you know, I had the artist produce 200, 100 of them are on their way to every HBCU signed by the artist. So we have
Wonderful.
to keep it front and center. Next time I'll make sure he's in view, but there's folks maybe on the call who don't know me might be thinking, what is this guy putting Frederick Douglass in the background for? Well, you know me.
I do. It's good to see you. And I see Diego, your buddy over there on the other side. Diego, I haven't seen you in 3 months.
There is one thing I wanted to add, but there were a lot of questions coming in. You had mentioned that, you know, corporate America, and it sounded like CFOs more than CEOs who turn to UNCF and say, I want to be able to measure. If I'm going to contribute X, I want to be able to see in 5 years exactly. See, here's the problem with that, Dr. Lomax, and this is what I've been preaching, at least to CEOs of the public relations industry, about 200 agencies, is that, you know, you can't even measure your strategic marketing communication investments, but now you're supposed to be given from your mind and your heart, and you're asking organizations like UNCF and others to measure specifically. So I say to them, why don't you come to visit some of these HBCUs, meet with the administrators, meet with the leaders, Dr. Staggers, Dr. Verrett. I've learned so much from them, but then when you meet with the greatest asset, the students, your future leaders, and you look into their eyes, and you hear from them what the opportunities are, but also some of the challenges. That's what you've got to measure. And then when you get on that plane and you go back home to your cushy office, surrounded by some other folks of privilege, maybe those students and those administrators, they're going to have an impact on the heart, which is far stronger than the mind. And then they're not going to ask these silly questions of you, Dr. Lomax, about how I'm going to measure it. They will get it.
You know, but Tony, let me just tell you, we're going to give them qualitative and quantitative measures of success.
Good.
And, you know, there are true believers like you. And over time, we'll convert more of them into the true believer category and partnering with us.
Amen.
I've been
great conversation, Dr. Lomax. Lois still at Bristol Myers Squibb.
How are you?
I am very good. We'll be talking more. We're working with Chad, as you know, and we've
I know.
done some excellent things. So,
And let me just say, this is a time when we need pharmaceuticals.
well, you know, we're already at the table.
I know you are, but you know, this is as we think about the opening, a a lot of this is a lot of the challenges as you and just your insights, I mean, are really around how are we going to provide the kind of environments where students and their families are going to feel comfortable about coming and learning. This
Well,
is not just
we have a great opportunity to lead by example, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the call.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
I know.
Thank you, Michael.
See you, Al. See you.
Brian, take care.
You too, Tony.
Nana, Pastel, you want to stay on the debrief?
Yes, I'm still on. I think Nana hung up.
Okay.